neurofeedback for people with chronic pain. Variations exist with each person, but one woman I dealt with, she was in her early 70s, and she came to my clinic a number of years back. She had a walker that she was using. She had an attendant who was with her. Her doctors said they could no longer put her on any more pain medication because she was on the highest doses that they could give her, and her pain level was still between 8 and 10. And so she was just debilitated with all this chronic pain. And, I said, well, let's give it a go. We can try. This is all non-invasive, so we're not going to hurt you with this. So, we're just going to see if we can help you dial down the tension, the anxiety around this, to see if that's going to make some difference for her. And lo and behold, 20 or 40 sessions later, I think we did 20 hours of training with her. She came in one day toward the end of her training, and she no longer had the walker.
There you go.
Wow. Embark on a captivating journey into the intriguing world of human consciousness with Douglas James Cottrell, PhD. Douglas and our diverse range of guests delve deep into the mind, illuminating our limitless potential. Engage in profound dialogues that pave the way for personal growth and uncover the hidden power of your consciousness. Your journey towards personal growth continues here. Now, here is Douglas.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the show. We have, again, an exciting guest today. You're just going to love what this very talented and wonderful woman has to say about her work. She's written a book called Solving the ADHD Riddle, and it's going to be a bestseller if it isn't one already. You should pick it up, but listen to the rest of the interview here. I want to welcome Dr. Connie McReynolds back to the show today. It's a pleasure to have you here. I trust you're well in this holiday season. Good to see you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me back, Douglas. It's great to see you again and be here again and really share the information with your listeners.
Well, for those people who might not have seen the previous interview that you were on, which is just going skyrocketing off the charts, people are just fascinated what your work is all about, and yourself and your new book. Tell us a little bit about how you came to solving the ADHD riddle and put it in the book. What's it all about?
Well, really, it's about understanding what's underneath the label. And that's my history. That's my educational background as a rehabilitation counselor and a rehabilitation psychologist, is kind of moving beyond the label, moving beyond the diagnosis, moving beyond maybe the traditional view of what ADHD is. And that's really what my work uncovered over the past 15 years. And so when I started peeling back what the perceived normality was of the label of ADHD, I started recognizing and evaluating and really investigating what this was. And what I came to understand over all of these years is that when we're able to identify the root cause of what's going on with ADHD, we have a chance of actually tackling that root cause and helping people move beyond the limitations that they may be experiencing with that diagnosis and with some other diagnoses.
Well, it's very important work. And I think everybody has things in their mind, in their background, that is affecting them in who they are today. Some of the scars, the wounding, the backgrounds, the bullying when you were a kid, or the mishaps, they kind of stick with you. But more important are the children who have this ADHD situation going on, and you have discovered a way to train the brain, if I can call it that these people can overcome this. Can I call it a disease, or what should I call it?
Well, I call it a challenge.
Fair enough.
Because I have found that when we use the terms such as disorder and diseases, it tends to kind of lock people into this state of mind that this is something almost impenetrable. I mean, we can't get past it. We don't know what we're going to do about it. We have these traditional beliefs about it, traditional interventions. And for the folks that come into my clinics, whether they're children or adults, these traditional viewpoints haven't really brought them to a better place in their life, nor have the traditional interventions. And by the traditional interventions, I'm generally talking about traditional behavioral interventions and traditional medication interventions. Doesn't mean that some of that isn't working for a lot of people. Obviously, I'm not treating everyone on the planet. I'm only dealing with and helping people in my clinics. So when I think about them coming in, I don't even think about it needing to be a quote treatment. I talk about it and feel about it that this is just a process that this person's going through, like any process, any challenge that we have in our life. And if we put it into the perspective of, hey, this is just something I need to figure out, then it becomes much less powerful for that person. And it kind of becomes a much smaller speed bump, perhaps in their road, than a gigantic roadblock that sometimes this becomes for some people. And so really that's what I do, is just kind of focus on where are you, what's going on, and what can we figure out. I have a 20-minute computer-based assessment that we use that's been validated in research studies. I've been using it for 15 years. And it helps me really understand, and the person to understand, okay, these are my areas of strength for auditory and visual processing. This is why this works so well for me. And these areas over here are not so strong. And so that kind of helps me understand why maybe when my boss talks to me, I can't remember what I'm supposed to do because my auditory memory isn't quite where it needs to be. So I can't hang on to that. And then I feel powerless to do my work. I get lost, and children get lost in the classroom.
Right. I've had some of that experience myself. And I think everybody, as you get older, you might be on the way to having some timers. Sometimes you remember, sometimes you don't. So, but along the way, the influence of your life creates trauma sometimes. And I understand you deal with military personnel and children been in foster care, children been traumatized in their life, adults as well. So could you explain to the audience how that works with people who have suffered trauma?
So that really began when I was in my doctoral program, close to maybe 30 years ago now, in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I was working at the VA there. I was on the chemical dependency treatment unit, and I was put in charge of running the anger management program for veterans who were court ordered in due to domestic violence problems and just anger management problems.
Wow.
And I worked with them, and we would have year-long programs. The chemical dependency treatment program, as effective as it was for those veterans, took a long time really for it to take hold for a lot of folks. And then the anger management program was weeks or months in length, and I did affect change. I'm happy with and proud of the work that I did there with the processes that we used to really help veterans get better management of this. And then when it came to trauma, PTSD, most of these veterans that we were working with, it didn't take much of a scratch of the surface to really figure out that we were really dealing with PTSD, regardless of what brought them in the door, whether it was chemical abuse or anger management or whatever. It was PTSD. And so if I knew then what I know now, I would have had a very different approach to helping them. And so fast forward to my work here in Southern California and delving into looking at the use of neurofeedback with trauma. And I really started this with veterans here in this region. So I began the program, and I've published on this. So I looked at our results that we achieved with, I think we had 30 veterans that came in. I can't remember how many I had in the study, because they came in at different times. And so we were collecting the data as we could and went along with it. But I was looking at, if we tackle auditory and visual processing problems, and we look at trauma and how that gets hardwired into the brain, can we impact general well-being? So does the general well-being in this veteran's life change after we've identified these areas that could be strengthened or, kind of helped? And so what I found when we ran that assessment for auditory and visual processing is the vast majority of them actually did have auditory and visual processing problems underneath everything else. So when that started, how it started, no one knows. We can't really speak to that. And then we also found that there was the stress level, the anxiety, the difficulties of just managing what it was like being back after having served in the military. And by using the neurofeedback, we were able to help that brain calm down. And so part of what neurofeedback can do, and the military has used this, by the way. And so I've actually had a psychologist from a base call me one time after I got started on this project and shared with me that at that base, they had actually treated over 500 veterans using neurofeedback.
Wow.
And they weren't able to really speak about it for some reason. So I didn't quite understand all of that. But
Classified information, no doubt.
so I did learn a little bit about the fact that they were using it. The military has used this. And then I did come across an amazing video clip of the Fort Hood incident that happened a number of years ago. And there was a training video that went out that was revealing the effects of using neurofeedback for one of the veterans who had had 2 or 3 tours of duty, and the before and after video clips of him, which were just stunningly different. And he himself spoke to the fact that had he not seen those prior video clips of himself, he would not have believed that's what he looked like and how he acted after he'd had the neurofeedback, because he couldn't remember that. And so it was really quite, encouraging to see that as well. And so that really kind of, prompted me to move forward with this and working with trauma for people. And what we really found is that it can make a big difference in a lot of different ways than traditional treatment for what has happened for a lot of folks with trauma, which had really been talk therapy or some of the other interventions that have been used over the years. And my conversations with veterans in this region when we were starting up this project is that they felt like the talk therapy for them wasn't very effective, because they would go to the groups or they would go in for talk therapy, and then all the memories would start flooding back. And then they would have 2 or 3 or 4 days of increased nightmares and just trauma around having talked about it, and kind of brought all that stuff back up to the surface that they didn't know how to process through. So with neurofeedback, the beauty of this is it just sidesteps the need for talk therapy, and it just goes straight into helping the brain learn how to calm down again. And so we just practice relaxation is essentially what's happening here. And so if you can practice it in an organized manner, and so it's structured, it's organized, you're coming in, you have someone that's kind of helping you know whether you have excess tension, because it's going to show up on the screen. If you're in a high stress level, it's going to show that. And it's like, well, I don't feel stressed. It's like, well, we're measuring that you are. So, here it is. This is your biological data that's saying, yeah, you're in a state of stress. So, and that was an eye popper for me in the beginning, because I thought, oh my goodness, well, of course, if you've lived like this for a long period of time, you won't remember or know what it was like to not live like this. So this has become normal for people. And this is how they operate. And they don't know any different. Yeah.
I'm relating to that myself. When I see some people come in to see me for counseling, their shoulders are up around their ears, like I'm indicating here, and they have no idea that they're like so stressed. For them, it's average, it's normal. And for somebody who's been in service, combat, who knows what they've seen or done, it becomes normal to be in that adrenaline rush all the time, so that you're on guard all the time. And every movement is like an alert that might be killed or hurt or whatever. And then I guess to deal with that, the brain must have some sort of balancing to say, okay, we went from the wake up in the West. Now we're in this environment where we're being attacked or possibly killed. and it adjusts,
Mhm.
and that trauma becomes normal. And then when the
Mhm.
person goes back to real life, that's still there without
Mhm.
any kind of like, here I am. It's kind of like a thief in the night underneath. And you've discovered a way on how to get there without the person having to go back to deal with the trauma. I think that's a miracle. That's amazing. How did you do that? How did you come across that ability to get under the layer and get down to where the challenge is?
Well, it just came from experience. And so it came from my time at the VA and understanding what PTSD really looked like. And I just will probably always remember this incident. We were working with a Vietnam veteran. The executive director of the program and I were in kind of a larger room just with this veteran. And unfortunately, the helipad for the hospital was like a block away.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. He hit the
And
floor, did he not?
oh my gosh, he reacted so fast and was under the table before I think I even blinked my eyes. It was such a rapid response pattern in this veteran that I was just kind of
Wow.
almost numbed to it. I didn't have words for it. Thankfully, being a doc student, had a great executive director sitting next to me. And I got to watch him, the executive director, who was so well trained in this, bring this guy back to the present moment and how that's accomplished.
I could
So
just,
that was something that has just stayed with me forever. And I thought, how many people are walking around like this in the world that are dealing with this? Another veteran lived kind of in a rural area outside of Madison. He was coming through our program, and the sheriff's office, everyone knew him in that small town because in the middle of the night, he would get triggered. He would go out in his backyard and he would think he's in a bunker and he would see things moving around and he had firearms. And so he'd be firing off his firearms in the middle of the night.
oh my gosh,
And so
that poor man.
we had him in. We were working with him some. And I think of these men, it was mainly men that I worked with. That's the reason I say that. Um, I think of these men, and then I fast forward all these years from that time frame and the veterans that we were able to work with here in this pilot project. So we actually were benefited by some community support for that program. And that made all the difference in the world because we could provide those services with the community support of a local VA, county VA, that helped us cover the costs of being able to do this work and helped cover the transportation costs for some of these veterans who were driving in more than 2 hours each way for their sessions for neurofeedback. And through that, then just this process of talking to the veterans, talking to people. There was one leader in the community who knew about neurofeedback. And I had been out in the community doing a presentation. He approached me and he says, I know all about this. And he said, we need to build a collaboration because I want you to be able to help me help these veterans in this region. And he was the one that secured the funding for me that
Now,
got that project going.
the proof is in the pudding, right?
Yes.
These men who were living, I guess, random access nightmares, if I can call it
Yes.
that.
Mm-hmm.
The proof is in the pudding that their recall, the trauma went away.
It did. It lessened substantially. And so I was really wanting to measure that. And so we had a well-being scale that we administered at the front end and the back end just to measure stress levels, kind of perception of the world and such. So we had hardcore data from pre-post that we could look at. And then, of course, we took the narratives and the stories of the veterans who were participating. And I'll always remember this one where he told me that we actually saved his marriage because he said he'd been married for some number of years, 20 or 30 years. And he said he would come home and his wife would ask him a question and he would just go ballistic because she was so pushy and always asking all these questions and he, couldn't handle it. And we did the neurofeedback with them and he came in after that and he said, I just want to tell you, he said, I now realize my wife was just trying to get some information. She wasn't doing anything to me.
She's trying to understand the situation. Like all wonderful, great women, wives, mummies, they want to help. And unfortunately, they ask those questions. It sounds like, what happened when you were there, and maybe you were in a firefight, maybe you did something really bad, maybe something happened to your buddy and not you, and you have survivor's guilt, and all those other things come up in a flash.
in an instant. And they
Yeah.
don't even know that's what's racing through their mind. It's just get back, get away. I'm not going to answer any questions, just leave me alone. And he said, I just want you to know we haven't taken a vacation together in 20 years, and we're getting ready to take a vacation together.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a really good story. Of
Mhm.
course, everybody listening to this now who may have a veteran in the family, or maybe now had a grandpa who has suffering this, and they were wondering why he was going out the back shooting a shotgun off or something, they're going to say, where can I meet you? Come on
Well,
over to our community.
just give me a call. That's all
And
you have to do
how do they
is
do
just
that?
give
How do
me
they
a
get a hold of
call.
you?
Right. So up on my website, which is www.Connie McReynolds. So it's just my name, CONNIE, McReynolds, McReynolds.com. There's a contact form there that they can just fill out. And if they'll put their phone number, if you'll put your phone number in there, then I will give you a call. And I do 15, 20-minute free consults. I just find that typically, if it's an email and there's a host of questions in there, it's going to take me far longer to write the email, and you're going to have more questions after that. I may or may not answer or understand what the written question is. And it's just a lot, I think, better to just have the conversation with you and just kind of talk about what are some options, and would we be positioned that we might be able to assist, and we could figure some things out. There may be some other techniques that a person can use. Certainly mindfulness and just learning meditation and being able to breathing exercises and things like that could be opportunity as well. So,
Well, I think
yeah.
that's marvelous of you to do so. And of course, people can ask intimate questions that they wouldn't maybe want to put on the
Oh, yeah,
internet, email and
exactly.
things. And so after they talk to you, then you can extend possible services. You can't be everywhere. I'm sure everybody would wish you were. So do you have like associates or other clinics that you've trained the consult, what can we call them, the therapists or the doctors?
Well, I really talk about behavioral clinicians, kind of a blend between clinical work and behavioral interventions and technology. So there's a small cadre of us here that do this work. And what's nice is once we do the intake, which typically is an hour and a half, then the sessions are 30 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week. And so, kind of regardless of which clinic they are in, they can run these sessions. So, I have 2 different clinics and we're in both, and it doesn't matter where the clinician's sitting, and it gives us the latitude of being able, if someone's on the East Coast or somewhere else, we can just adjust our calendars to fit that. And it's 30 minutes, a couple times out of a person's week.
Okay.
And that's really what that is. And so it makes it possible for us to really manage most of this in a effective way. So it's not as, it's a commitment, it's a time commitment for the person, because you're going to be with us for a little bit of time. And so typically it's a minimum of 20 hours for trauma. Sometimes it's going to take more because the trauma has been there in some cases for decades. So
Yeah.
this didn't just happen. And
Well,
so,
that's a small price to pay.
mhm.
If you could say you're having nightmares for decades from whatever happened, and children as well, foster care problems and abuses and things like that, which we'll talk in a moment about, to say, I need a 20-hour commitment from you, and you say, I'm going to get my life back. Where do I sign up? So
Mhm.
just how long have you been doing this, so that just people are wondering, this
Mhm.
isn't recent. This is going on for a long time now.
I've been doing this for 15 years. So,
You know your
but
stuff.
neurofeedback has been around since the 1970s. And it's just kind of an interesting thing. I think people, maybe it's been since the pandemic. I don't know. It feels like things have opened up a lot more in people's minds. And the opportunities for these alternative modalities seem to be rising more to the surface. It's also why I wrote the book at the time frame that I did, which is I felt like it's time to get this information out about ADHD. But even in the book, I talk a little bit about trauma. I didn't go into it a whole lot because that could be a whole other book. I didn't want to get off topic too far with that. But with the trauma, it is so important that people understand there's help out there that might be different from what they've been told in the past. There are different ways of getting at this. And so if talk therapy didn't work for you or someone you love, that doesn't mean that's the end of the road. It just means that particular modality isn't right for that person. And so there could be something else that's right for that person. We just have to keep looking and keep asking and seeking for that, because I firmly believe if we put out there that we want help, it's going to show up. We're going to find it. And so when we put that commitment out to the world or the universe or to wherever you want to call it, I think we can find it. And I think there are ways to get people connected to support systems that can make a difference. I think it's time that we heal this trauma. It's time that we get this cleared out of people so that they can live the life that they were really intended to live, which is not this hypervigilant and adrenaline, cortisol infused response pattern that keeps them off kilter and their loved ones off kilter as well.
Well, I agree. I guess the way if somebody listening to this interview, they would be maybe fitting into some of the categories we've spoken about, or they've had similar experiences, and they're maybe rationalizing it, thinking about it. You go like, is this real? Is this possible? Well, the question I'll pose to them would be, has anything that you've done previously worked? And if it hasn't, here's a golden opportunity to try something that's very new, that is proven. I mean, the military doesn't spend big bucks on their veterans on a whimsical kind of maybe possibly airy-fairy kind of stuff. They are hardcore hard facts. And, I'm going to ask you about the children who've had suffered like that, but just the military guys, I mean, this is pretty serious stuff. I mean,
well, it really is. Yeah. And we've had a number of women who are coming in who had a different kind of trauma that often has been hidden away. And that's a pretty hard one to talk about. So it was a different kind of trauma that they went through in a lot of cases. So there's a lot of residual from some of those situations as well. And thankfully, women are coming forward a little bit more than they used to. So I've been working with a couple of women, and even in that pilot project we did, we had a couple of women that we were able to get in. It's a lot harder to get them recruited in because there's a lot more hiddenness. I guess we could make that word up, but it's really not talked about very much, and they don't come forward very easily.
Well, I'm of the opinion that when something bad happens to you, maybe the priestess touched you inappropriately. Maybe the school teacher did something. Maybe the schoolyard bully did something. Maybe a boyfriend did something. Maybe daddy did something. There is, in my counseling of people, there is first of all an assumption that they're guilty. They did something wrong, and they caused this to happen, letting the bad guy off the hook, or the bad person more exactly. So getting past that, when they speak to you, it's confidential, it's an intimate conversation. And again, you're not trying to relive this isn't going to court and reliving the trauma, the whatever. You're getting down into the underlayers, the inner world, inner thinking of the brain, and remedying there. So if I'm right, if I'm wrong, correct me, but if I'm right, then people ought to, if they have any concerns at all and they want to go back, even though they're saying, no, that was when I was 15, or that happened when my first husband was an alcoholic, whatever, that it doesn't matter. They should come and see you, because that never goes away, does it? It's always there under the surface. It's
under the surface because this kind of trauma that these situations bring, and it can come from car accidents. And I will mention a book that just popped into my mind that is mandatory reading for anyone who works in my clinics.
Wait a minute, let me write it down.
Well, you may have heard about it. So it's Basil Vanderkolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Wow,
And
the title. Wow.
yes, so he wrote one of the best books I've ever found on the market, because he wrote it for those of us who are not the brilliant wizards that he is.
Count me in.
Yeah, I'm in that pile. So he wrote it for those of us who really don't walk in that heavy world that he walks in. For the average person, I'll just say, to be able to read. And he really talks about what happens with trauma. And the beautiful thing within his book is that he recommends neurofeedback for trauma. And so it's such a great book for people to read, because it will give them some understanding of what's happened within the body when there's been a traumatic event of any kind. So it can be car accidents, it can be childhood trauma, it can be, the adverse childhood events, that ACEs score. It can come from any number of things. I just opened a case on a child who has been adopted, fortunately. He's been with his adoptive family for 4 years now, but his first 3 years he was spent locked in a closet. I see this stuff come in my clinic. And over 15 years, I can tell you there have been a lot of these stories of children who've come in that we're dealing with, trying to get that unwound out of their response pattern. So that's the survival mechanism of the brain. That's the amygdala system. And that survival system is here to keep us alive. And so when that system gets triggered and re-triggered, and there isn't a way to kind of get out from under that, then that system gets, what I came to describe it to our veterans, it's like, that system works very well. The trouble is it just got stuck in the on position. And we need to reinstall the off switch. So that's what we're going to do, is we're just going to put the off switch back in there, because you need it in case you're getting ready to step out in front of a car coming at you. You have to be able to activate that system to get out of the way. But you don't need that at 3 o'clock in the morning when a dog's barking. You don't need it 24/7. You only need it when there's a true life emergency now. And in the past, everything was a life emergency. So we just need to retool that a little bit. We just need to calm it down and let it remember that there's another way for it to be. And so let's just get it calmed down. We're going to do that. You don't even have to talk to me to do it. Just come on in. We're going to sit you down in front of a computer. We're going to do this 2 or 3 times a week. We're going to do this for a while until you're feeling better. So, that's it. Let's just do this and go with it. And that's what we do.
Okay, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of Dr. Connie McReynolds and solving the ADHD riddle. We'll be right back.
Did you know that Dr. Douglas Cottrell has several other weekly channels where you can participate? Check out his Sunday International Spiritual Healing Service on Zoom. And you might also enjoy the Wake Up podcast exploring human consciousness, awareness, and intuition with Dr. Douglas and co-host Les Hubert. Just go to DouglasJamesCottrell.com and message us on the contact page to add your name to the Zoom links of your choice.
Well, just before the break, my friends, we were talking to Dr. Connie about trauma and how children have been, especially, not especially, but children that have been somewhat abused in foster care, or that they've had traumatic experiences. And then how I think you said that the brain is a protection mechanism that gets switched on, and then your therapy or service teaches how to shut off that normal survival mechanism in the body. And I was intrigued with your remark. We said it's just sort of left on all the time. So great when you need it, when you step out in front of a car, as you say, to jump out of the way. Not so good when you're at 3 o'clock in the morning and you got a wife and children and you go ballistic and everybody turns on the lines and the lights and goes, "What's going on?" So tell us how do you get to switch that off and sort of maintain that balance between still having a survival mechanism,
Right.
but calming down that mind, especially in
Well,
children.
well, yes. And so what I really have found is adults who've had the childhood trauma, it's really hardwired in. So for those adults who went through it, and that can come from bullying, that can come from any host of things, that stuff gets stuck in the brain. And so that survival mechanism kicks in because we're not feeling safe. It's like we're getting bullied. That means we're not safe. We're not feeling safe in our world. And that system is going to go into high alert. It's like then we're kind of watching for things, we're vigilant. And then sometimes the brain can go into what we call hypervigilant mode, which is where the PTSD really resides. It's in this hypervigilant state that it's just on 24/7. So I've often explained to people, it's like, well, you have a floor. And so let's say we have an average floor where everyone starts, but you have an incident that happens. And so the ceiling and the floor could be pretty far apart on the average person. So you might get a spike, it might go up a little bit, but then that system's supposed to come back down to the floor. So now let's go along. We've had 2 or 3, maybe 4 incidences of something happening that's unpredictable. There's something that's frightening us. There's something that is feeling unsafe. We don't know if we're going to be protected by something. And so that system goes up and starts responding, but it doesn't ever come quite back down to the floor again. And the more of that happens, the more the floor rises up and the closer it gets to the ceiling, to where we get triggered so easily because the floor and the ceiling, there's very little space between them. And so what we need to do is lower the floor. So we want to get that adrenaline system to calm down so it's not pumping so much adrenaline into the body and the cortisol. And so those are the protective mechanisms that our body gears us up. It actually can cause the cortisol can cause weight gain in people if it's there for too long of a period of time. So there's all kind of body mechanics that happen. And Basil van der Kolk's book really talks a lot about that, which I think is such a great book.
I love it. The body.
It's a good book to have. I keep a copy in the clinic for people. It's like, here, take this one home with you. You're going to need to read it.
It is so true, and for those people who don't have ADHD, for those knuckleheads like me who played football or hockey and you abused your body, well, if you if you abuse me now, I'm going to get you later. And so,
right.
You're limping around, your back hurts, your head hurts. And so that's just logical stuff, right? And of course, if I knew now what I should have known back then, I wouldn't have hurt myself so much playing for nothing, just this bragging rights in high school, whatever, in college and stuff. So I love that title. The body keeps the score. It's great, and that's I guess would be a good way to open up somebody's thinking and say, okay, so solving the ADHD riddle, that just is the next step, but it makes sense to somebody's, again, I think usually there's a lot of mistrust. I would assume, at least I would have some experience that way too. There's a lot of mistrust with people who want to help you because people that were supposed to help you may have been the perpetrator who took advantage of you or, whatever. But when you're in combat or when you're as a child locked away in a closet for years, or you've been made into a slave when you've been adopted into a family or foster care, that's got to change the person's personality, their values on the world, and a whole lot of other things. Maybe they're becoming a criminal in training, or maybe they're becoming a revolutionary or a terrorist in training because of what's happened to them. And so it would be important to shut this down before they get along that road too much further.
It is. And the beautiful thing of this is it's possible to do. And we can literally help the brain learn how to calm back down by teaching it how to relax. And so it's really learning how to relax. The challenge with trauma is that it's such an instantaneous response pattern. like the people I've described, it just comes so fast. The responses come so quickly that it's so hard for the person to slow down that reaction, to have space in between what they hear, experience, and how they respond. And so the neurofeedback intervention helps give that space. And so that's what the veterans have described it as. And that's what I've even had teenagers describe it as, who couldn't pay attention in school, or everything just flooded them all the time. It's like, this gives me a chance to choose my response. It's like, well, how great is that? If I can have a moment to choose how I'm going to respond, then I have a lot more control in my life for how I'm living my life. And that's really where we want people to get, which is an empowered state, that I can choose how I'm going to respond to this, instead of just being at the mercy of what my body system is going to do when I get triggered.
Well, on that note, what's in my mind as you're talking, I'm thinking first there's the memory or the thought, and then there's the emotion, and they're linked together.
Yeah.
So maybe the therapy is breaking that link between the memory and the emotional response, which is instantaneously. You go right back to that emotional response. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is, because what someone figured out how to film, pardon me, how to film dendrites and neurons in the brain connecting and disconnecting. So that was such an interesting thing when I found that, because when we train the brain to learn something, we're literally connecting these dendrites together, and that's what becomes a habit, which is also why bad habits are hard to break, because they're wired in. So you can think of it as being kind of hardwired in. If we want to move into something else and away from certain response patterns, we have to create something different. And so when we're creating something different, we're literally using a different road, if you will, in the brain, so that old road just kind of prunes away. And so there are video clips of these pruning things taking place in the brain, where these disconnections are happening. It's like, this is disconnecting. This is connecting over here. So if I want to get rid of a bad habit, I can't sit around and think, oh, I need to get rid of this bad habit. I need to get rid of this bad habit. I've got a bad habit. That's just hardwiring in the bad habit. Then the way to get to that, you have to figure out where you want to go, not what you don't want to do. You have to figure out what you do want to do. Well, if I want to eat healthier, I have to go to the grocery store and buy healthier foods to start with. So I have to make those decisions. I have to maybe clean out my pantry. So I have to make that decision too. Throw that stuff in the trash, take it out to the dump, and get rid of it if I don't want to eat it. So that's really kind of what we're doing here, is just, where do you want to go? If you want to have a calmer brain, then we have to do things that help the brain remember how to be calm, or learn how to be calm in a lot of cases. And we do that through the repetition of calmness training, of relaxation training. And we can do it because we're measuring that response pattern in the person's brain. We have a little sensor. So we have these little sensors that we put on the scalp, and it's going to tell you when you are in an excess tense state. It's going to read that, whether you believe it or not. It's going to show you, it's going to flash on the screen, excess tension, so that you can literally figure out, oh, that's what that feels like. Oh, I've had it so long I didn't know. Kind of back to where we were earlier. If you've always had this kind of state, it's really hard to know something different. And so part of this is giving people the feedback in a nearly instantaneous manner. This is how your brain is responding.
You can watch it on the screen? You can watch it on the screen? Wow.
You watch on the screen. You watch it on the screen. So this is going to flash on the computer. That's excess tension. And there could be some bars going up and down of different colors, and we may have thresholds that you're trying to do. And sometimes we have training programs that we run that, if you're manifesting a calmer brain, you're going to win that program, or this little video game or something. Kind of keep the brain occupied, the mind occupied, while we're training the brain. And it's all non-invasive. So there's not anything being administered to the brain. You simply are just learning how to have more empowerment over your own mental faculties, if you will, over your response patterns when we're dealing with trauma. We had one parent came in that the child was afraid of the wind. Well, we live in kind of a windy area around here, and she couldn't leave the house when the wind was blowing. She literally had a meltdown anytime that was happening. And so we got her in and we worked with her. We did about 20 hours, and it's never come back.
I thought you were going to tell me now she's out sailing.
Well, she very well may be. We haven't heard from her. She's doing great.
That's the best, right? When you
Yeah,
don't hear back from people, you know they're
they're
done.
doing fine. That's right.
How far back in time can you go? Can you go back to when, like, I'm gonna ask a little bit about those people that are hostage over in the Middle East now.
Yeah.
Can you go
Yeah.
back in time? Because I'm sure those little babies and those people are going to be suffering great trauma. That's going to be. I mean, on some news things you see kids shaking. They're like they're in some other dimension, if you will, and they're just shaking. They're so
Yeah.
afraid. How
Yeah.
can you go back in time and maybe you have some thoughts about what's going to happen when the hostages are released?
Well, we've had hostage situations before that we know
Really? Wow.
that happens. We've had the Iran hostage crisis decades back. There have been other types of certainly hostages in military situations, POWs, and just there's a hostage is just a really, really uh, mentally damaging situation that people are in. They're completely out of control. It's a completely unsafe situation. They have no idea if they're going to survive whatsoever. And so when they finally get free of that, there's going to be disbelief, there's going to be anger, there's going to be all kinds of emotions that are going to surface, depression. They need to be monitored closely for any kind of suicidal ideation. And then they need help. And talk therapy may or may not be the answer for some of this. So just remember, if we're going back and rehashing things, some people need to do that in order to get clear of it. So it works for some folks. For some folks, it's a massive trigger and it makes it all the more worse for them. So really kind of figuring out, and there are people who are trained to deal with the de-escalation of folks who've been in hostage situations. I mean, back in the day when we had a lot of bank robberies in the world or whatever, people were taken hostage during some of that. There have been hostage situations. We just have to be very mindful that not everyone needs the same intervention. And so we
Hmm.
have to figure out what the right intervention is for each person. And it may or may not be talk therapy. It may or may not be medications. It may or may not be neurofeedback, but it could be any of those that would help the person get past this and reclaim their their functional brain. And the other piece I want to really kind of talk about is when this amygdala system gets hardwired in the on position, research has shown that that system actually gets bigger. The amygdala system can actually grow in the brain. And then there's the other system, which is the executive functioning part of our brain, which is kind of the frontal part of our brain. And that area goes a little bit offline. So that's why we can't do a lot of good rational decision making when we're in a traumatic response pattern, because we don't want it. Our brain is going to override that. We don't get to make a decision on how we're going to respond when our life is threatened. Our brain's going to take over. That survival mechanism is going to take over, unless you've been seriously, trained, like our military forces or people who've been trained to be able to manage that. But the average person's frontal lobe kind of shuts down. So that rational thinking, executive decision making, and the longer this amygdala system is kind of activated and triggered, the more that can shut down, and they may have difficulty kind of being able to make decisions in their life. We kind of talk about it takes up more real estate in the brain. And so, and what comes to mind is really something that I think people really don't know very well. I've seen some research out there on it, but not a whole lot, is that when people are asked to give testimony about a traumatic event, they're supposed to put it in a linear manner.
Oh gosh.
Many people can't, because that's not how trauma gets stored in the brain. It doesn't get stored in a linear, logical storytelling experience. It gets stored in an emotional, psychological, scattered pattern. That's why sometimes a smell can bring back a triggered response pattern, a sound, something that someone sees, a movement of some sort. That's the emotional brain and psychological brain there. It's not the rational brain being able to talk about that. So when a witness or an eyewitness to something can't tell the story, or a person who's experienced that can't tell the linear story, it isn't because it didn't happen. it's because it wasn't stored in a linear manner that they can talk about.
Kind of random access, right? The brain, and maybe that's a self-defense mechanism, putting little bits of negativity, if I can call it that, in different places instead of one big globule, a critical mass kind of thing. Makes sense to me. But is there a time lag when these little kids come back, or when people have gone through traumatic experiences, like survived a car crash where they're the only one left, or a plane crash? Is there a time lag where there needs to be like a healing and then the treatment to the brain, or can it be done right away?
Well, I think there are different schools of thoughts on that. I think whatever that person's really needing, people need some support, I think, right away, just to let them know people are around. They may not be able to talk about it, though. And that's the key here, is they may not be able to talk about it. So they may need other types of support where they're
TLC
just,
or something.
yes. Yeah. Everyone could be a little bit different on how that happens, but some people can talk about it, and they need to talk about it, and they need to talk about it, over and over. We just don't want them to get stuck in the talking about it. We want to help them move on at some point, because some people can get so locked into the story, then they can't move forward. And that's a trauma response pattern too. And so if someone is just constantly locked in telling the same story over and over and over and over again, that can become a re-traumatizing experience for them as well. But everyone's different. So we can't just create, a cookie cutter here. We can't just pigeonhole people and say, oh, you're talking about it too much, I don't want to hear about it anymore. They may need to be talking about it, but maybe they need some professional help to help them move beyond it too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it requires, if you're a lay person, or somebody in the family or a friend, your friend's calling you up and they're complaining about some abuse that's happening to them at work or whatever. And in my world, I would tell people, just be patient, let them talk it out, and they'll feel better. But don't tell them what to do. Don't say you need to talk to a lawyer, you need to talk to a defense attorney, you need to talk to, like, just say, okay, so what are you going to do now? How about you do something on Sunday, or let's go to the theater, or more, let's go to the ball game or something. That's the first line of lay people defense, is letting somebody talk about it, because then maybe they'll go the next step. But listening to what you had to say today about your book, Solving the ADHD, that's my dyslexia coming in. I'm reading the title here, and it's backwards here. So everybody, pardon me. It's Solving the ADHD Riddle, Alpha Delta Hotel Delta Riddle, by Dr. Connie McReynolds PhD. Go get the book. That should be your number one action right now, other than maybe listening to this interview over again. And this is going to be everywhere. It'll be on my podcast, the Wake Up, and on the Global Village Radio Show, as well as on Instagram and many other places on the podcast, as well as on the YouTube channel. Listen to it again or pass it on. How do you feel about people taking the information and maybe they think somebody should talk to you or see you? How should they share that information? I guess you have to be kind of careful. You don't want to hit somebody over the head with this and be a Bible thumper and say, go see this person. How can they, any suggestions on how they might make that suggestion?
Well, I think a soft approach, with that, it's like, and maybe you're thinking about someone else and you're talking to them about someone else. I was thinking about this for so-and-so. What do you think about this? Have you seen this? And then maybe you kind of, get them to buy in a little bit, just to let them know information's out there. Have you ever heard about neurofeedback? I watched this program the other day and was learning about it. I don't know. What do you think about it? Something like that, which you're not prescribing or demanding or, insisting that someone do something because you've seen it, but maybe just, hey, have you ever heard about this? I don't know. Tell me about what you think. And then maybe the conversation starts.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. It's kind of let the other person discover it themselves, and they'll be motivated to go further. Listening to what you've said today, and also in the previous interview, my God, you've covered a lot of territory, and with understanding the brain. I've been curious about human consciousness all my life, and including the intellectual and then the intuitive and then the spiritual aspects. They're all one and the same, just different levels of consciousness, if I can generically call it that. But The idea is, listening to you, you've done a lot of, you've been in a lot of places, and I mean, you've been in dark places with people. You've been with children. You've talked to people in military, which I absolutely, because I have military clients and friends. I love the Marines. My dad and uncles were in the Air Force and served in Italy and things like that. My father was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. The point being is that you, first of all, to compliment you, you have had the wherewithal to discover this and push this forward. Other people are picking up on it and using it because this is gold to helping anybody get their life back. Is there much more to go? I mean, I'm rhetorically asking that. I know the answer, but is there much more you can explore or places to go, you know?
Well, I think so, because one thing I haven't talked too much about is chronic pain.
Oh,
And
let's talk about that. We got 10 minutes left. Let's talk about that.
so chronic pain is kind of an interesting thing, and that's a challenge for a lot of folks. So at some point, somehow I got referred into, or people got referred to me from fibromyalgia support group. And so I started working with folks who had fibromyalgia. And then there's some great books, more great books here as a reference point for your listeners is some of the work that Norman Doidge, Doidge, has done around chronic pain and the stories that he tells, the interviews he's done, and the work that transpired around how chronic pain literally takes over the brain. That was the real estate, a reference that I made earlier, is that,
wow.
Yeah, it takes over the real estate. So chronic pain, if you're in a chronic pain situation for an extended period of time, which is what chronic pain is, then it literally, he described it as it takes over the real estate of the brain. And so people will find themselves not being able to think their way through a problem. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed by things. Maybe they feel brain fog. Maybe they're feeling all kinds of words to describe it. But what he is saying is that you lose the other functional capabilities in your brain because the pain is taking over other parts of the brain. It's just encroaching. And so his work has been in helping people figure out, again, how do you reclaim those parts of the brain and how do you get the chronic pain under control? And again, in one of his books, he's referenced neurofeedback as being an approach to tackling that. And so I've used neurofeedback for people with chronic pain. Variations exist with each person, but one woman I dealt with, she was in her early 70s, and she came to my clinic a number of years back. She was there because I think maybe the facilitator of that group had heard about some of my work and had referred her over to me. When she came in, she had a walker that she was using. She had an attendant who was with her. Her doctors said they could no longer put her on any more pain medication because she was on the highest doses that they could give her, and her pain level was still between 8 and a 10. And so wow. She was just debilitated with all this chronic pain. And, I said, well, let's give it a go. We can try. This is all non-invasive, so we're not going to hurt you with this. So, we're just going to see if we can help you dial down the tension, the anxiety around this to see if that's going to make some difference for her. And lo and behold, 20 or 40 sessions later, I think we did 20 hours of training with her. She came in one day toward the end of her training, and she no longer had the walker.
There you go.
She had a cane that she wore as an arm bracelet. Better description I don't have. She had her attendant with her. And as we were kind of going through the closeout of it, she said, well, I really don't need my attendant, but I just like her, so I'm going to keep her for the company. And she said she was off her pain medication. And she said her pain levels were a 0 and a 1 now. And
that's
her
amazing.
life had been changed. So I can't guarantee that anyone else would have those results because you can't do that in my work. But we can say this is what we did, and this is how we did help this person. And we do know that neurofeedback has helped people with migraines. So there's some aspects of that. And all of these things are research-based. So we go with what the research is out there. When someone walks in, it's like, well, let's do some research on this. Let's figure out kind of what else is out in the literature. And we do that. And then we find ways that we maybe can help someone. And if we can help, that's what we're here for. And, I do have a release. So I can't guarantee the results. So I'll say we're going to do our best, but I can't guarantee the results here, but we're going to do our best.
There's one thing you can guarantee. If you don't come and make the attempt, then I guarantee nothing is going to change. But if you do come and make the attempt, then the probability is, no matter small or big or large, something is going to change. Mm-hmm. And, you're a marvelous a lady and researcher. You're a genuine Florence Nightingale type person. You're helping everybody, and you've been in such an array of background and experiences. I'm impressed, not to flatter, but to say I'm impressed that you've had this tenacity and the wherewithal to keep digging and exploring, and not when you got to one level saying, okay, I'm now in the military, I've got a cushy job, I'm quitting. I'm not going to go any further. You kept on keeping on, I guess is the word. And to get to children and women who are in trauma and difficulties, to pain management and giving people who have been in the service their life back. The reason I knew when you were talking about that man that came in your office and the helicopter went over the building and hit the deck. My friend, I'm not going to say his name, I'll say his first name. He was in Vietnam. He was a physician. He got citations and award for operating in the field with under a flashlight and bullets going over his head. And one day I was visiting he and his wife in their house, and his wife we got talking about Vietnam a little bit and his service. And then she started to say, yes. And one day there was a police helicopter went over the house and he hit the deck, or he hit the floor, and she was laughing, right? She said, well, look, I mean, it's his wife, Mm-hmm. She said, I couldn't believe it, just like you were saying. And so that's why I got a little ahead of you on that one, because I could see that they're all military people that were in Vietnam, had those helicopters, Hueys going over, and then bullets came down. That was a natural reaction. And again, there was no thinking. It was an automatic response, right? So that goes back into your key of where's that trigger point? And how can we stop it from being triggered? How can we lower the floor down? How can we get to that calm area again and learn not to be triggered while still being cognizant of dangers around us all the time? I just think it's marvelous. For my generation, Vietnam was a big deal. And there is still a lot of pain about that. Maybe there's people, I think one of the big things that the veterans, when they came home, they were spit on and yelled at. I'm sure you've had to deal with some trauma along those lines as well.
We have, that coming back home to that wasn't really a coming home for them. It was quite different for them. But regardless of that, anyone coming out of military conflict and wars, they come back with residuals most of the time. And so it's really, some of it they work through because it may not be so locked in for some people, but the folks that, find their way to where I am usually have the residuals. And if there's something that we can do to really kind of ease that up, then we're going to give it our best shot to try and get that eased up. And that's really the goal of all of this, is helping people. I mean, the underlying mission, the whole purpose of all of this is really helping people live their best life. And that's the mission of everything that I'm about, whether you're 3 or 93. If there's something we can do that we're able to kind of help some of that get calmed down or tuned up, if you wish, whichever way you want to go with it, then, we're here. And we're happy to help. And again, I'm happy to talk with people on the phone. Don't write me a 10-page email, because I'm still going to ask you the same questions when you get on the call with me. It's like, okay, what's going on? And so, a little background, that's fine. We can shorten up the background talk and then kind of get to where you want to go. But I think there are ways we can help some folks. And that's why I'm so grateful to you.
The website is ConnieMcReynolds.com, and the phone number is on the website, I assume.
Yes, and the contact form is on there. So if they fill that out, then I get a little bit of their history. I get their name, and then a phone number, and maybe some times that are good for me to give you a call. I'm on West Coast, Pacific time in the United States. So I'm happy to talk with folks. I heard from someone from Australia yesterday. So
I was going to say that because we have an international show, you might just have people from Spain or Norway or Australia, where the show is popular. It's been a delight talking with you, Doctor. As Dr. Connie McReynolds PhD, solving the ADHD riddle, the real cause and lasting solutions to your child's struggle to learn. And if you have a veteran, you have somebody in your life that has trauma, or somebody comes to your attention, share this information, and Dr. Connie and her team can change their life in just 20 sessions. That's amazing. It's always a pleasure. Until next time, I wish you much success in your career. And, well, take care and God bless. Hey, everybody, you're listening to the Douglas James Cottrell Show, also available on the podcast Wake Up, on the Global Village International Radio Show, and right here on our channel. Until next time, remember, the journey doesn't stop. Right here, it's just beginning. So continue on your search to expand your consciousness, and may you enjoy the holidays. May you have a wonderful life ahead. And if you need Dr. Connie's help, I urge you to buy her book right away. It's available on Amazon and every place in far and wide, and go to the website, ConnieMcReynolds.com. It's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show again. I wish you well. I am thoroughly impressed with your work, and what a wonderful person you are. You care so much for everybody. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Here on the program, Douglas speaks with fascinating guests who share their experiences and insights. We post new videos frequently, so be sure to check back often to see who's being featured next. For more information about Douglas and the guests, check out the links in the description below. And please make sure to subscribe by hitting the subscribe button so you won't miss a single episode. It also helps boost the signal and spread the word about the show. And feel free to add your comments below. Your feedback, comments, and suggestions are what help us. And thanks for visiting.